Hello and welcome to Up Next in Commerce, the show where we get to hear from fast-growing D2C founders to executives leading the charge at the Fortune 1000 and everything in between. I'm your host, Stephanie Postles, CEO of Mission.org. And today, we got to hear from Fariba Zamaniyan, the Vice President of Advanced Media at Xperi Corporation. And while you might not know of Xperi Corporation, I bet you do know the name Tivo, which was acquired by Xperi in 2020. So you might think of Tivo as the DVR of days gone by, but the brand is still having a massive impact. The data that the company is gathering is making it possible for brands to understand their customers better as it relates to TV and streaming advertisement. And importantly, how to segment customers in a way that allows brands to reach them in the moments that matter. Fariba explains all of that on today's episode. Before we jump into the interview, I want to give a quick shout out to our partners, Salesforce Commerce Cloud, who help make this podcast possible. You can learn more about Salesforce Commerce Cloud by visiting salesforce.com/commerce. All right, let's jump into it. Welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you here today. I know we're going to have an awesome conversation. First, I want to hear how you got into the space you're in, because I was looking through your LinkedIn and wow, I mean, to me, you're like the OG in the media advertising space. You worked at Nielsen, Ipsos, Nielsen again, Tivo for a long time. So I want to hear, how did you even get into this world?
Yeah, I mean, I really had a passion for marketing when I went to college. I went to Ithaca College, which was an amazing experience, great emphasis on the media and communication sector. But, in your early days, not like kids today, back then I knew marketing was of interest to me because I was so influenced by advertising and entertainment in general when I was growing up. And, my parents were immigrants and, they couldn't get enough of American culture when it came to entertainment, and the experience of going to the movies and sitting around the single television set in the living room and watching, regularly airing entertainment shows and the movies of the week. It was just something that I couldn't get enough of as a child, which really, even through today, I didn't need a pandemic to become an intense consumer of entertainment. And so when I graduated, there was a recession, and I happened to stumble on an opportunity at Nielsen, and I didn't know what aspect of marketing exactly I wanted to pursue. And so Nielsen just immediately exposed me into the world of measurement and advertising measurement in particular. And I realized that I had this quantitative side of me that, was trying to calculate and understand what was the underbelly of whether it was how an advertisement was put together or once it was on air, what it would do in terms of influencing behavior. And that really just became a unseated passion that I realized that I had, was the ability to leverage data in order to help build better, more impactful advertising by the measurement techniques that back then were very, what we would call archaic today, panel-based, diaries where people would actually use a pen or a pencil and write on paper. It's so hard to believe, kids today are appalled at some of the things that we did prior to email and the internet. But it was an incredible initial exposure into this world of where billions of dollars are invested to bring brands to consumers, and brands being what need is it fulfilling from a physical need. But I think much more so as we think about today's world and all the different ways we're being targeted by media is what's that emotional experience and takeaway, or whether it's a physical need or emotional need that brand helps fulfill. And so Nielsen was that starting point. And then having had incredible exposure to companies like MPD Group, which is now going to be merged with IRI, two giants in the marketing research space by venture capital. But they were an incredible experience because of their entrepreneurial spirit and enabled us to build solutions to help measure the impact of advertising, all the way through to Ipsos, where I was working much more in the copy and brand equity evaluation space. And then really just moved into where the digital intrusion started, which is, the impact of media on advertising placement. And I got the opportunity to work on a startup called IAG Research, which was acquired by Nielsen, in changing the way which we are able to measure advertising in terms of its ability to break through, be memorable and persuasive. And that was, an incredible pivot point because we were just getting exposed to the digital age within media. And here we are today within Tivo, worked at a startup called TRA, which was acquired by Tivo. And two more acquisitions later, a company called Rovi, and then most recently Xperi, still retaining the name Tivo. 13 years later, it's been an incredible experience being part of the evolution in media and advertising.
Wow. Yeah, that is definitely an evolution and a journey that you've gone through with all the different companies, and I'm sure you've seen it all. I actually used to work with Ipsos back in the day, back in my Fannie Mae days, doing like research papers, and
Yeah.
I have a lot of experience with them. So, how do I think about the landscape today? Because when I talk to a lot of brands who come on the show, many of them are and these are a lot of like D2C companies coming on, and even the larger ones, they're just now saying like, well, TV's back, shoppable TV. I mean, we're seeing great results here, but it feels like they're just starting to kind of dip their toes in maybe for the first time or doing it again in a new way. So how do I think about what the landscape looks like for, something like Tivo and how brands can play?
It's actually a very exciting time, but it's also an incredibly difficult time, because what we see in the landscape is the various ways that we can reach a consumer through touch points. The laptop was the first to kind of extend beyond the main TV screen. Then we got our mobile phones, are basically our walking mini computers attached to our hip, our laptops, our iPads, and then in growing number of TV screens inside the household that are smart, because they're all digitally enabled to drive an experience that can be nimble and flexible and not just based on a schedule. And that's where it makes it very challenging for a brand, is that we went from a world which was very scheduled, where I knew how I could reach that consumer, not just how through the main screen, the glass screen on the wall or on a tabletop, but I knew when, because the content that was being delivered was controlled in that it was a scheduled time and day. And even before the DVR, which Tivo really was kind of we shook things up and were a big disruptor, because we started to take that control away from those that were delivering content, because now I could record and watch that show at a later time, which would be unknown, right, from the advertiser perspective. And so now we're in this medium where we as a consumer can access that content whenever I want. It doesn't have to be on a date and time that is being delivered through one screen. So that presents challenges in touch points. And how do I know when I'm going to reach this valued consumer that is going to drive sales for my brand, whether they're an existing customer or an acquisition? So the challenge is, how do I know when to reach them and which medium is the best in order to ultimately drive conversion? So it really brings forward this immense need for data, not just from one single platform type or channel, is that I need to now gather data and intelligence about my customers from all of the different touch points. And that presents challenges. because of not just privacy and opt-in, the availability of the data, but also how do I integrate that to that personalized experience? And so every brand is going to have a different journey in terms of what the customer takes from where it goes from that first exposure all the way through to the point at which they're ready to make a decision. So a direct-to-consumer brand versus a more traditional on-the-shelf, say, consumer packaged goods brand is going to have a very different challenge when it comes to how do I assess all of these different touch points, knowing that the control is no longer through scheduled media. It's now based on personal experience for that consumer, which brings into effect lifestyle, not just their demographics and geographics, that's like a basis for getting started, right?
Yep.
If the product's even relevant. But then it's about that journey for each of that consumer. So it's incredibly complex and very different than what we experienced before. But what it does bring forward is the opportunity for optimization and some of the new techniques that are being presented to deliver those messages so that ultimately we can reduce inefficiency and waste, which keeps media marketers up at night, advertisers, maximizing every dollar that's invested to ultimately have an outcome. So I think that's really the landscape that we're talking about now. And it's incredibly exciting given this personalization that we can bring forward, but it's very complex and can be challenging for more brands than others, especially those that are more in controlled, privacy controlled environments, such as direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising, for example.
Yep. What about, I'm imagining right now outside of pharmaceutical advertising, we'll put that one to the side because that's like a whole different beast. But
it is a beast.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't even want to touch that one yet.
Yeah.
But I could see a lot of D2C companies, adopting really quickly to this. They're used to all the metrics that they're, normally get on any other platform. They have very high expectations of what they should be able to see. What about the larger companies, though, who maybe, have in the past relied on the Nielsens and, surveys and, sample data and stuff? Like, how have you seen them adapting to these new platforms and all these new insights and ways of doing things that are probably very different than how they've ever done things before?
It's an amazing evolution, I have to say. And like we share past with Ipsos and even NPD. And I think about those infrastructures of those large organizations like P&G, Unilever, Colgate, all the big ones. They were so reliant on external partners, various agencies to assist them in basically taking these volumes of ad buys that they were making because they were so channel controlled, linear TV. And then, when the internet came about and banner advertising, display advertising, still relied incredibly heavily on external support systems to enable them because their infrastructure didn't have the talent pool nor the fundamental underbelly in terms of execution systems or platforms. And what we've seen, especially in the last, I would say 3 to 5 years, are these major companies now starting to take, you'll hear me say control a lot in this conversation, but I think they're taking a lot of that control and bringing it in-house and investing in talent pools that enable them to start now harness the power of digital. Because again, inefficiency and waste is top of mind for many of these organizations because of their size and their volume, that this evolution now has enabled them to really rethink the infrastructure of their organizations and bringing the capability and control in-house. And whether it be, let's say, a digital internal system that has the responsibility for planning how they're going to execute digitally. And now with all of the evolution in the touch points, including the ways that we can bring touch points together through artificial intelligence and machine learning and what we call device graphs, that is becoming more a part of the vernacular, where about 3 to 5 years ago, if I had this conversation with a brand direct, it would just go right over their heads because it wasn't part of their infrastructure because everything was outsourced. So now you've seen major companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, for example, in the soft drink area that have built and invested in talent pools internally that are really building these think tanks of how they can harness digitally the different ways to reach their consumers, but doing so from within their own walls. So I think that's been the major change that we've seen with these larger organizations that traditionally were not as nimble, another buzzword, as a direct-to-consumer brand who's been born and raised in the digital ecosystem that's had that control and the access to techniques and tools like machine learning in order to get smarter and more efficient of how they execute and deliver their advertising and then measure it. So the bigger companies are still behind, but quickly building upon these new technologies that are evolving and bringing that talent in-house and restructuring the way they do business around it.
Yep, that makes sense. So what do you think about Nielsen then? I mean, in my mind, outside of the pharmaceutical stuff, like I don't know, are they going to be a thing in like the next 3 to 5 years? Because to me, data's all around us. You just have to know how to use it and harness it and, get insights from it. And so if you didn't have privacy issues outside of those kind of industries, like, will they be a thing anymore?
I think the recent changes certainly dictate that they will. They were just acquired, or at least in the process of acquisition by venture capital, so Elliott Management Group. So this is a incredibly influential VC that I don't think they would invest in a Nielsen if they weren't going to be a thing. So I think what Nielsen's experiencing is, an adaptation of the industry to taking control back in how they want to, especially on the publisher side. So think of the content providers, the Paramounts, the NBC Universals, et cetera, are really now, because they have the data, they have the ability to see what are the levels of interaction with their, let's say, app-based viewing. They know what the sizes of those audiences are. They know what the usage behavior, the things they didn't have insight to before that were controlled by Nielsen. Now they can see. They can see for themselves, which is what's driven the disruption, because they disputed what was coming out of some fairly antiquated, because they're very expensive techniques to change overnight. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is a great opportunity for Nielsen to really reinvent itself. Mm-hmm. And obviously it's a global company. The US is different in how it harnesses and leverages data. Some of that's going to change because of privacy regulations that we're going to start to see more of, similar to what's happening in EMEA, for example, and GDPR. But I think that Nielsen's position in how it's going to be leveraged is going to change, whether it's a currency, which I know is another area of conversation and debate. I think that they are well poised to retain that currency position once they get through this kind of, let the dust settle a little bit and really start to refocus on what it is they do really well. And they do really well at, think of it as calibration. There's a lot of calibration that has to take place when you think about channels of distribution for video content. There are different ways to get to it. There's limited data sources. And so coming up with a single methodology that is considered truth is where I think it's difficult to put that on all of these other providers that are coming out, where Nielsen's kind of coming to the table with a lot of credibility already established. So I don't think they're going to go away. I think their position in market's going to change.
Yeah.
But I think they'll be in a better position to fulfill that position now that they've gone through, or as they really settle in with this acquisition by venture capital.
Yeah, makes sense. It'll be interesting watching them potentially disrupt themselves and, kill off their entire
Yeah,
business that brought them here, which so many companies have had to do. So it
yeah,
makes sense. And then see what happens and see, yeah, if that the credibility factor, who it matters to. Because I could definitely see a lot of companies, it's going to matter a lot to have, Nielsen
that's
stamped or
right.
someone stamping the approval on the metrics. And then maybe other ones being like, I don't need a stamp of approval. I'm moving quick and breaking things. I don't care.
Exactly. And I think that's really the real opportunity here. As a marketer and an advertiser, you now have choice
Mhm.
that you didn't have before. So Nielsen was it when it came to that currency and said, this is the number of eyeballs, this is what the price is going to be based on those eyeballs. And now in today's world where you've got, bidding systems and programmatic, a supply and demand chain, as a direct to consumer, 100% digital, that's the universe you can operate within, and your prices can be driven based on supply and demand versus an external third party telling you what the price should be. So it's actually incredibly exciting, I think, for that advertiser to know what kind of options they have rather than
Mhm.
be forced into a single directive on how much money to spend and where to spend it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So I want to hear some secrets that you're uncovering right now. I mean, you guys get, insights into a lot of data. You get to see what consumers want. You get to see what the best brands are doing and what's actually working. So I want to hear if I'm a brand thinking about jumping into this world, like what are some maybe secrets that others don't know about around maybe how consumer behaviors shifted over the past couple of years, or maybe things that are working that haven't worked previously or are brand new? Like, what are you seeing behind the scenes?
Well, I mean, we are a provider of, so Tivo, we have software that basically we work with pay TV providers, so which are evolving from what they're called as cable providers to really broadband based and delivering that content experience. So we've been capturing data passively through our software that think of it as like the iOS of like the iPhone, that like underbelly software system is what our software with the interactive guide, and as it evolves more with search and recommendation software, enables us to get access on a passive basis, the insight into consumption patterns of video content. And so what we are, I would say we are one of the most neutral parties out there, meaning we are not a walled garden. So our software can sit on different types of cable providers across the US, different TV sets. It's not limited to a single provider type.
Now YouTube, right? You guys just integrate with YouTube TV.
Yes, on our Stream 4K. That's right.
Mhm.
So, really bringing that experience and diversified experience to consumers. We're gathering on the back end. We're looking at the data on an anonymized basis, of course. And so, the exciting thing that we're seeing is that level of interaction that's happening when it comes to video consumption. So I said earlier about that scheduled experience is what we were able to harness as an industry on, putting a currency behind media placement. And so today it's very difficult because we don't know what are the habits and practices because things sit behind walled gardens. So how do I know if the experience on a Samsung TV is the same as somebody who's on an LG TV when I'm going to those two separate walled or a Vizio
Yep.
to really understand behavior and generalize that if I'm a brand that has, a consumer target that's a cross section of the US. So I think what I think for us, what's exciting as a neutral party is we're seeing that more of a cross section of these behaviors, and something where we've done over the past couple of years. We launched a media player called Stream 4K, going beyond our legacy DVR experience of bringing entertainment to consumers so they can find, watch, and enjoy, is that we are now also seeing the behavior and interaction between linear and stream based or app based viewing. And that interaction is helping us. And what I'm excited about is to understand a little bit more about the habits and practices of homes across the US and various types of homes, of course, in understanding like what is that consumption pattern, right? How like not everybody has cut the cord. That's a big misconception. And in fact, there's even more of a potential rebundling coming back where the cable providers are being able to draw back consumers who are tired of not being able to find what they want to watch because it's disaggregated across, tens of thousands of apps that are out there that you can download.
Yep.
And of course, there's some big winners like YouTube, like you mentioned earlier, of course, especially for short form content. But for that long form content experience, and being able to understand behaviors, I think for us, we're in a unique position. What I'm excited about, or some of the secrets that I think that we're going to be able to uncover soon is, what are those habits, especially for those that have both in the ways to reach or deliver a brand message or advertisement versus those who are only in app-based. And again, I'm talking about that video consumption through the traditional screen, the TV screen. And so I think that is a big question mark. And I know Nielsen and the, ComScores and a lot of folks have had initiatives to try to get a sense of that. But I think that what we're really excited about is to quantify that behavior so we can help present a guide that's 10,000 feet up about what are people doing on a given day of the week or, month of the year. Has the seasonality changed? We're so used to certain seasonality of linear content. In the fall season is new shows, then you've got mid-season replacements, then you've got finales, then you've got the summer programming, you've got all the live sports in between and tent poles like Super Bowl and Olympics. And so I think that now that we all have seen this massive penetration of smart TVs in homes, people are, accessing their content through Wi-Fi versus a coaxial cable. This is really changing that entertainment experience inside the home. But wouldn't it be great if we also understood when are those points in time that we're going to be able to reach that target audience with the greatest potential, meaning the largest audience or greatest pool of that target at a certain time of day and week. So I think that's some of what secret wise that we are gathering and very soon to bring to market. And it's really exciting.
Okay. Are there any early insights you can share? Anything that, you're starting to see around, I don't know, Samsung TV, not as much usage. It's hard to use. I don't know. I just made that up. Or is there any just early data points that could be completely wrong that you come out with your report in a month and you're like, sorry, Steph, that was inaccurate, but anything that you guys are starting to see bubble up right now in the data?
Nothing that I can with confidence say is
Okay.
It's still so new, and otherwise I'd be, chomping at the bit to share it with you. But I think it's more of just being able to see the amount of time that's being spent especially in an app-based is for me incredibly. I mean, there are lots of numbers that have been quoted out there. Some are surveys, some are within walls of, is it an hour a day? How much time is it a month? And what are those apps they're spending? And more importantly, for the advertisers out there are those ad-supported environments? Are in terms of those that are subscription based. So the SVODs, the Netflixes of the world versus those that are ad supported video on demand services, which enable that ability for advertisers to drive incrementality to their other initiatives. So outside of the traditional linear experience, the scheduled experience, to the one that is on demand by the consumer, which is, it's a tough nut to crack. And optimization is difficult because we tie everything to outcomes based, post exposure, do they then go? So I think that's where we're now really evolving. And there's some great companies out there that are starting to really standardize their practices across verticals.
So When a brand starts thinking about, pursuing this as an advertising strategy, how do you recommend they think about, segmenting their customers out to make sure that they're effectively advertising? Like, what are some best practices around that?
Well, I think that, the traditional techniques are still very, very sound in terms of identifying, who is the target consumer and going through very rigorous techniques, including, interaction with customers, even traditional things like focus groups, right? I think we don't talk about focus groups anymore, but
I hear it every once in a while, but yes, not often.
not often anymore, right? I think that, we can't lose sight of that human element as part of the development process. I think what we have to be concerned about is, because of all of these passive big data sets that are being collected, kind of as in this voyeurism type of setting that we're in, that digital has enabled us to do, is that it does a really good job of really understanding behavior from a consumption and then ultimately action, whether or not they go to a website or actually buy the product, et cetera. But the understanding of the consumer, what drives them, the emotional elements, the fundamental, think of that, what was that hierarchy
of needs.
Let's not forget about that. And the ability to interact and talk to your consumers. If anything, we've learned, look at this world we're in and doing a Zoom call, and we realize that we still need to see each other and talk to each other. Email and is not enough, right, when we're interacting. And I think the same holds when you're with consumers, is the ability to still talk to them and make them tangible, but understand that we can't generalize them, even within a target, right? So I always use this example in the early days of targeting audiences in media, is that we may fall within the same demographic group, and yet my preferences for video could be completely different than yours, right? So let's say I check all the boxes on demo, geo, income, all those stuff. But what drives me in my entertainment experience is an individual need. It could be where I am at the state of, my life cycle, family, social experience. So that's the world that we're now in because of micro-targeting and these capabilities that we have of personalization. Is we still need to understand these individuals from what drives them and what motivates them. So that human element of understanding still needs to be a part of the customer segmentation process. We can't rely on just these passive data collection from 10,000 feet to drive segmentation. Certainly is a starting point. But then now that we have this capability of personalization through digital channels, now we have to even get more and assure that we're aligning this customer segmentation process to align with how we're going to reach that individual. So there's a gap in between that's always been there, especially in the years prior to digital, where we spend all this time in segmenting our consumer base. Let's say we've got 5 key groups that we have identified, and then we go on air and media, and it doesn't include any differences between the 5. It's just a general, I'm going to buy based on, where the eyeballs are for this demographic and geographic. But now I can target based on a host of other things, such as whether or not they buy my product, they buy competitors, I want to do some conquesting, I know how much time they spend on my app, etc. But am I then doing that at a basis that coincides with those 5 different segments that I've developed, which are being defined based on something other than behavior when it comes to actions? It includes their emotional, psyche, home, their status at home. Do they speak Spanish predominantly in the household? So, these are just, basic things thrown out there. But I think that's really the challenge now in the customer segmentation piece, is ensuring that when we look at the outcomes, because we can do so at such a finite level, that goes back into the customer segmentation process. And so it is an end-to-end that we've never had before because we couldn't track somebody through their first exposure to an action in the old days. But now that we can now tie that back into the customer segmentation process and defining those core groups and turning the dial up and down like we can in a simulator on each to determine what level of investment and what are the strategies and tactics we want to deploy to get to each of those different groups. And that tactic could be different. So it could be one is going to be traditional linear, highly efficient, supplement with some CTV, because now we have ways to target for incrementality and place against that target. So we just need to diversify the plan that really speaks to each of those segments.
Yep. Seems like although we're learning more about, the human element piece and trying to understand humans better and, what we do and how we interact and consumption patterns, it also seems like it's going to keep getting harder and harder because there's all these new places to play. And one person can essentially be anyone they want and, act in a different way on every platform they're interacting in. And especially once, metaverse and VR becomes even more of a thing, it's like all of a sudden one person can be like 100 different profiles. So it seems like the needle, like the bar will keep being moved higher, even as we keep trying to understand that person and where they're at. It's like it keeps getting harder to understand them because you're able to do and be so much more than you ever could, even 5 years ago.
That's exactly right, Stephanie. I mean, it is really that. And I think that but at the same time, it's what we've been asking for as an industry, right? Long ago, I remember it'd be like, oh, I need the Holy Grail. I need the Holy Grail where I can tie somebody from exposure to action. Well, guess what? We're well past that. We can do it. Yeah. But now it's brought a host of different challenges because
we don't need that anymore.
We don't need that anymore. Now it's more of like, oh my gosh, we could do it in so many different ways as individuals. And so the best thing we can do is start grouping these people into look-alikes, that they look a lot, and assume that we could drive impact without draining our resources, because all of this comes with a requirement on resources, whether it's people, dollars to invest against the campaigns, the technology, the outsourcing that needs to be done. So all of this needs to be brought into consideration. But the advancements are there, especially with machine learning, and which kind of segues into that whole, like you said, metaverse and, these new worlds that we're creating, literally. It's just going to continue. The bar is going to continue to get higher. But I think it's still a advancement from where we are, which is what we should all be really proud of as an industry.
All right, so I want to do a quick lightning round with you before we end the interview. You will have 1 minute or less to answer each question. The lightning round's brought to you by Salesforce Commerce Cloud, our lovely sponsors. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, first question. If you had a podcast, what would it be about and who would your first guest be?
It would be about data. And
I knew it.
And my first guest would be the trade desk.
Interesting. All right. I like it. Mm-hmm. What's something you don't understand today but wish you did?
I would say a little bit more about metaverse and that, because to be honest, I've used my nephew's Oculus and it makes me nauseous. So I don't know how people are going to do that.
Supposedly it's getting better.
Okay.
But we'll see. Yeah. Back in when I was at Google, I sat down in it was a simulated car, and then you had to like drive and do all these things. And I remember walking away being like, whoa, whoever has to like do this every day, I am very sorry for you.
Yeah.
But I guess it's getting better. What is your favorite piece of technology that you're either experimenting with right now or want to, that you're maybe really bullish on?
I would say, to be honest with you, I'm constantly experimenting with our own product, our Stream 4K, and where we're taking it into the tvOS universe. So I think I'm really excited because I didn't spend enough time comparing the incredible attributes that it has versus some of the other media players. So I think for me is really engrossing myself in that consumer experience like everyone else, and then bringing that intelligence back in-house based on that experience. Also knowing what would a marketer do with this type of information. So wearing all those different hats, really exciting for me is to apply my own personal experience to that.
Yep, amazing. All right. Well, this has been an epic interview. Thank you so much for hopping on the show and sharing all your wisdom. Where can people find out more about you and what you're working on?
Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm there. That's a social platform I use all the time, Fariba Zamaniyan. Just look me up and learn more about the types of things that we're doing at Tivo. Follow us at Tivo on our Tivo blog on LinkedIn. And we'd love to hear more from you at getconnected@tivo.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was great being here.
If you're looking for the #1 platform for all things commerce, there's no better choice. So definitely go check it out at salesforce.com/commerce.